No. So then I told this jerk, I'm gonna shove my foot up your crack. And then he said, okay. And I was like, what? Hey, John, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. You know, I was thinking, actually, you're the movie guy. What's your favorite movie?
No. Did he just ask me my favorite movie? Oh god, this has to be a trap. It has to be a trap. He knows how far my reputation's been dropped when I answer Gotti. It's true, though. Oh, whatever. He's my friend. He'll understand. Yeah, it's funny you ask that. Yeah, see, my favorite movie's actually, Gotti. You know. Yeah. John, are you still there? What are the best movies of all time? As we know, film is subjective, and anyone can have their own opinions as to what they consider to be the best of the best, but in reality, there's no real right answer here. Your grandma's favorite movie is more than likely going to be different than your favorite movie, and that's the beauty of cinema. But as with anything, there are more common opinions than others. You're not going to get more than 2 random people in the same day saying that Disaster Movie is the greatest film ever made. If you do, you might want to pinch yourself because you're probably in a Twilight Zone episode. But on the flip side, go to your nearest film school and you'll hear plenty of the same movies come up, like Citizen Kane, The Godfather, Pulp Fiction, or Goodfellas, and that's the point of this video. I'm going to be taking a look at what I believe to be one of the more accurate best movie lists in terms of public opinion, and that's going to be the IMDb Top 250. This list aggregates the best movies of all time, according to IMDb user scores over the course of the site's existence. Now, while there are other lists like this on different websites like Letterboxd, I feel that this one has been around longer and overall has many more users, providing a more balanced and rounded list in terms of differing opinions. But as you could probably tell by the video length, I'm not going to be looking through all 250 of these things in a single video, rather just the top 10. Then in part 2, the next 10, and so on. Basically, this series is going to go on till I die, so make sure you get comfortable here. The Shawshank Redemption is the perfect example of why a good story is so important to making a good movie. Everything in the film is in service of supporting the story being told. You got beautiful cinematography, a touching soundtrack, and performances that are just subtle enough to make you believe everything that's happening. The beginning sets up Tim Robbins' character perfectly. You don't know much about him, aside from the fact that he may or may not have killed his wife. The film respectfully keeps this a mystery for the majority of the film, which I feel is a good way to get us already hooked onto the story. The other characters, of course, are fantastic in here as well. You get to know these guys, and through the film's intelligent and purposeful use of imagery and music, it's able to build a strong personal foundation, so when you end up getting those important emotional climaxes, they pay off. Very, very well. The story alone is already exceptional, but when you combine the other factors like acting, soundtrack, and direction, you really start to understand the beauty of filmmaking and why when things like these come together, it really makes for a life-changing experience. And look, I get that it can be a little cheesy at times, but overall, this is in no way out of its league here being at the #1 spot on the list. It's accessible enough to appeal to everyone, and I don't count that as a fault in any way. Are there other movies that I like more than this one? Sure, but I can easily understand why it's at the top of this list, and honestly, can't get mad at that. What's to say about this movie that hasn't been said before? It's the mob movie. I mean, they got everything. Shootouts, Italy, spaghetti, cannolis, meatballs, I'm walking here. I mean, they really got it all. The film jump-started the career of nearly everyone involved, most notably Al Pacino, who used his newfound fame to star in hit films such as Scarface, Heat, Jack and Jill. The story of the Corleones is just so interesting. There isn't one time in the film where audiences should feel cheated because every character is so fleshed out. The choices made by them feel like fair and natural extensions of themselves. This makes Michael's rise to power all the more frightening, which brings me to the violence in this film. The movie changed cinema as a whole. Violence was shown in full realistic detail to wide audiences. Well, yeah, almost. There were bullets spraying left and right, hands getting impaled, and a severed horse head in this guy's bed. Look, it's not a film that I necessarily connect with in any sort of deep way, but it's still what I would consider an incredible experience. I mean, there's a reason that this film in particular has been talked about since the day it came out, and there's definitely no denying that. The Godfather Part 2 has what many sequels don't: growth. in every sense of the word, and it's a sequel that feels like an organic extension of the first. Not some forced thing that was created just because it was part of a successful franchise and they wanted to make it into a stupid trilogy. The film feels like a completely different experience from the first, while still providing a sense of familiarity and progression in the story. Again, everything feels natural. Nothing gives the sense that they just put it in just to move the story along, which is very important, especially in a 3.5-hour long movie. And while on a surface level the film is a great watch, reading more into it gives it a bigger portrait as to why it's so revered. There are so many parallels with the first, which again make it work as a sequel. It feels necessary, and not only amplifies the quality of part 2, but part 1 as well. That's when you know it's a great sequel, unlike this piece of shit. Personally, I liked Pacino a bit more in Jack and Jill, but yeah, he was good in this one.
Dunkachino?
Don't mind if I do!
What's my name?
Dunkachino!
It's a whole new game.
Dunkachino!
You want creamy goodness? I'm your friend. Say hello to my chocolate blend. Attica.
Oh man, when this movie came out, YouTube was the dumping zone of Joker impressions. There was not one day anyone could go without seeing one of these.
Missing your balls. First start with your head, the victim gets all can't feel the next.
Even though those days are thankfully behind, it really is a testament to just how amazing Heath Ledger's performance in this film really was. A lot of people talk about how scary he was, but can we please talk about this guy's comedic chops? It's so expertly done, because his humor doesn't ruin his dark mystique, it enhances it while giving us some really quotable lines.
Let's wind the clocks back a year. These cops and lawyers wouldn't dare cross any of you. I mean, what happened? Did your balls drop off?
The thing about the film I love almost as much as the Joker is the fact that this feels like a director's vision. Christopher Nolan was honestly the best pick to direct a Batman movie, and this film easily proves that, but seeing as how it's considered the 4th best movie of all time, I need to mention something. It's not perfect. How did the Joker not get immobilized from the explosion in the police station? How did he plan to get locked up in the MCU and have this guy beat him up so he could hold him hostage? How is he able to predict or plan any of this? It breaks the immersion a bit, but to be completely honest, if we compare what this movie does right to what it does wrong, it's not even a contest. This is truly a great action film, and while I wouldn't go as far as to say it's the 4th greatest movie of all time, it's still very enjoyable and deservingly remembered. Yeah, this movie is a complete work of art. Every single choice from the characters to the shot composition to the dialogue all serve a purpose. There isn't one thing in here that I could pick out and claim as any sort of film-breaking flaw. The entire thing is just talking, and it's one of the most engaging and exciting films I've ever seen. Of course, the writing is the best thing about this movie, and quite frankly one of the best scripts I think ever put to film. Its attention to detail is what makes it feel so rewarding to the viewer. When a character pops in and brings up a great point, you have no choice but to get excited at the turning flow of the conversation. 12 Angry Men really has this beautiful quality about it, where I think anyone in any year can watch it and get something out of it. I mean, this was made more than 50 years ago, and it still feels like a current thing. It's crazy. The directing from Sidney Lumet is of course fantastic. It isn't stylish and in your face because it simply doesn't have to be. Take the 5-minute long take in the very beginning. The movie isn't screaming at you about how cool it is. It's there because it works as a way to introduce the characters. Overall, every choice from the filmmaker in this thing is absolutely perfect in my opinion, and it of course deserves its spot on the list. Man, what a film. Funny enough, this was one of those film essentials that I never got the chance to watch for the first time until the making of this video, and wow, truly a work of art. The content in this film is the absolute stuff of nightmares, and from a visionary standpoint, is filmed in quite possibly the most effective way I've ever seen on the topic of the Holocaust. The choice to go black and white is just genius and isn't purposeless in any way. When it really shows why it's there, it's just so effective and left images in my brain that were impossible to forget. Seeing how director Steven Spielberg released his fun blockbuster classic Jurassic Park just months before this film, it's obvious that he really paid attention to making this one as appropriately as possible. The cinematography is masterful, but doesn't go out of the way to call too much attention to itself. I will say I had a bit of a problem with some of the musical choices in the movie, seeing as how I felt they took away from the horrors of what was happening in a few moments, but overall, I wouldn't say anything in this movie was distastefully done at all. It genuinely felt like Spielberg was driven to tell the story the way he wanted to tell it, and that led to it affecting me pretty heavily when watching it. Schindler's List is definitely one of those movies that everyone has to see at least once in their life, and that way alone, I feel that it being on a list like this is totally justified. Not much needs to be said about this beautiful monster of a trilogy, but here goes. Lord of the Rings is amazing, but seeing as how I'm starting off talking about the last film in the franchise, spoilers are pretty much unavoidable with this one, so if you haven't seen these, I suggest you skip to this time in the video. Alright, so Return of the King, the finale to what I can confidently label as the most epic trilogy of all time. The sheer scale of these films is honestly frightening. I mean, imagine being director Peter Jackson, coming from a filmography of relatively smaller comedy horror films to being given 3 gigantic movies belonging to a franchise that the Stanley Kubrick said was impossible to adapt to film. With all that pressure being put onto one man, this could have easily ended in a complete disaster, but no. God no, this franchise is an incredible piece of work. Return of the King, being the final movie of the trilogy, had a lot to live up to, having the duty of paying off big things promised in films before. And it being number 7 on the list should tell you, yeah, it definitely passed on that mark. Whether it be Aragorn's encounter with the Army of the Dead, Smeagol's ultimate demise, or roll credits, The Return of the King, this movie knows how to please its audience, and it doesn't feel undeserved either. Overall, this is an experience that has truly earned its acclaim, and while Return of the King may be my least favorite in the franchise, that doesn't really mean anything, because I consider all of these movies masterpieces in the fantasy genre. Definitely a must-watch. Okay, here we go. Pulp Fiction is my favorite movie of all time. There's not one aspect to this thing that I wouldn't consider masterful, and it's the movie that really sparked my love for film as a whole. It just has so much to love about it. For one, director Quentin Tarantino's style. While yes, it is very dialogue heavy and on the surface aimless, each conversation actually ends up adding a new layer of depth to specific parts of the film. There are just so many payoffs in this thing that are driven solely from pieces of dialogue that at the moment just seemed like small talk, but actually ended up playing as a very satisfying little finish to something you had no idea was actually being developed. I think my absolute favorite thing for sure has to be the characters though. Every single one introduced, no matter how minor, feels completely alive and real. And what's crazy is that at first glance, these people are totally unrelatable. I mean, let's take a look at Vincent Vega. This guy's a full-on killer. Yet we as an audience are somehow interested in everything he does or says in the entire film. And that again is due to the wonderful characterization that's driven solely from the dialogue. There's an investment in these characters that we built through the movie's running time, and all 3 of the nonlinear stories in the movie do a magnificent job of making us as an audience feel rewarded for that. And look, don't be surprised if you see me make a full-on video about this one in the future, because I could go on for days about just the music alone, but I'll leave it at this. If you haven't seen Pulp Fiction, please, do yourself a favor and watch it. Here's another one I didn't get the chance to see before making this thing, and again, I'm completely blown away. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is very, very good. It's really easy just to see it as a standard Western nowadays, but that's only because of just how influential it was at the time. For one, the music, which I know has been talked to death about, but deservingly so. Ennio Morricone's score for this movie stands as one of the most iconic things ever in film history, and thankfully the movie stands tall with it in terms of quality. The Dollars trilogy, but particularly this film, stood as a big contrast to the American Westerns of the time, with instead of having flawless heroes committing selfless acts, it took the route of having dirty, selfish scoundrels in the leads. Even Clint Eastwood, who the title labels as The Good, does some pretty messed up stuff, and that's honestly what I love about it. The movie feels so much less predictable than the American Westerns, and in that way, it works at keeping the audience on edge as to who's going to end up achieving their goal. After all, the movie isn't just about the good, it's about the bad and the ugly too, all of which are fantastic characters as well. Aside from the score, I think my favorite thing about this one is the tone. When it needs to, it can take itself very seriously, but in a lot of my favorite moments, it's humorous and isn't afraid to lighten the mood.
See you soon. Idiots.
It's for you.
This is the best Western I've ever seen, and it only makes sense that it came from the master himself, Sergio Leone. Look, there's a reason this movie's fingerprints have refused to go away to this day, and as has been the pattern with this video, it easily deserves its placement on the list. In a continuing weird fashion, now we're going to talk about the first movie in this 3-movie trilogy after talking about the third one first, but not talking about the second one at all. As stated before, Return of the King is a masterpiece, and Fellowship of the Ring is no different. This being the first one, the one to introduce us to this massive universe and story, did an excellent job doing so. While the later films would grow increasingly more complex, Fellowship takes an intelligently simple approach, making it easy for us to acquaint ourselves with the characters and where the story will go. Like Sam Raimi with the Spider-Man trilogy, Peter Jackson took a lot of what he learned from his previous films into this one. With camera tricks like the forced perspective of the hobbits, horror elements like the ring wraiths, and that incredible makeup work on the orcs in the film, Jackson really proved that he was the perfect guy to helm this Titanic-sized project. From a production design standpoint, this movie's absolutely flawless. You can tell that everyone involved was really passionate about this thing and did everything they could to make the world of Middle-earth feel as authentic and lived in as possible. Every component from the costumes to the sets to the special effects just oozes enthusiasm and adoration for the source material. And that goes without even mentioning the cast, all of whom couldn't have been picked better and truly earned their roles in iconicism. Look, I've said it once and I'll say it again. Probably again when I talk about Two Towers. But this trilogy is truly as grand as you've heard it is, and of course is right where it belongs on a list like this. Now that I know what good movies are, I can confidently go back to that guy and tell him my favorite movie. Okay, convenient built-in time machine, take me back!
Favorite movie?
Oh, yeah. Godfather. That's my favorite, definitely.
Godfather? Dude, you're basic.
This video series is useless.